mark. I had studied a lot of it, but tried to learn everything I could. And a lot of times when there's bite mark in these bite mark cases that have led to exonerations, one of the ways that they had exonerations is that they would just basically do DNA testing on the rape kit. Well, in 1983, there wasn't a such thing as DNA testing. They could blood type and match blood types, but there was nothing to really definitively say, hey, this DNA belongs to this person. And to complicate the blood typing, Robert and the victim's blood were the same. And so you really couldn't distinguish between the two. But there was evidence that actually everybody wanted to seem to ignore that excluded Robert. The fingerprints found near the air conditioning units where the body was left excluded Robert. The hair samples collected off of the victim's body excluded Robert. No one saw Robert near the scene. No one could put the fact that Robert even knew this victim at all. So there was evidence that seemed to have been overlooked because I think they were so reliant on that bite mark evidence that was their convincing factor, and I don't know what would have changed their minds back in 1983.
Right. It's incredible how weak the evidence really was. The snitch and the bite mark, of course, at that time, I guess bite marks were considered valid. But when was it that they have lost their luster, so to speak, and people say we cannot use a bite mark as solid evidence?
Yeah, I would say beginning in the mid 90s, maybe even late 90s, the American Forensic Board of Odontology really started putting down guidelines and saying, hey, look, this you can't say that this is definitively matches this person. They tried to conduct studies to show that bite marks were an individual characteristic like fingerprints, and all of those studies showed that they were not. And those studies went even as far as, in one of them, 100 experts, forensic odontologists, were given photographs of injuries. And 30 out of 100 couldn't even identify whether it was a bite mark or not, let alone that it belonged to somebody. And so I would say late 90s, that's where it started taking off. And then with the National Innocence Project and other innocence projects that are state-run, really started hammering away at these convictions. And we now are to the point that we just don't use that kind of evidence.
Right. Well, Attorney Warren was saying that your unit is going to go back and look to see were there cases of bite mark evidence and see if possibly people can be exonerated as a result, since it doesn't hold up. Besides bite marks, what else would you put under the category of junk science?
They used to do a lot of hair comparisons where they would take a strand of hair from the crime scene and then a known hair, like in Robert's case, they took his hair and they compared it to hair that they found on Barbara. And some wrongful convictions have occurred, and the FBI really worked on this and overturned several convictions back in, I think, 2014, finding that just looking at two hairs under a microscope to see if they're the same hair is not scientifically sound. And so we just really don't do that anymore.
I see. Yeah. So with all the 3,000 pages that you had to look at, what in the world made up that huge file in his case?
The trial was extremely lengthy because of the dentist, and before the trial, then there were depositions of every witness that they had come on contact with, because remember, this was a death penalty case, so that
right.
it was very. The defense attorneys did a marvelous job. I mean, they didn't leave any stone unturned back in 1983. The defense attorneys, I couldn't have really done a better job than they did. And so I had to read all of those trial transcripts, and then I had to read any motions that were after the trial. Of course, the police reports, trying to piece together 1983 police reports, took time and a lot of effort. And as I mentioned, a lot of these bite mark cases have been exonerated because of DNA evidence. So when I started really delving into the case, I said to myself, well, I'm just going to go get the rape kit tested for DNA. Unfortunately, that was admitted at trial, and the clerk's office, because retention schedules and laws didn't exist then, destroyed all of the rape kits, we thought, in 1990. So we couldn't even go to the rape kits and say, let's just do DNA testing and see whose DNA was there. And so then, as we're continuing, I wasn't going to give up. We continued to work on the case. I talked to just about anybody that would listen. I spoke to an old detective that was already retired, and he said, hey, did you check the medical examiner's office? Sometimes they kept their own rape kit slides.
Oh, my.
So we did, and they had them. And we immediately sent them off to a lab in California because they said they would do the results within 7 days. We sent them the rape kit slides. We sent them Robert's known DNA. They not only excluded Robert as being a contributor to any of the samples, but we also were able to identify the major contributor through what's called CODIS, which is the national database where people's DNA is stored that are in jail.
And why is that a good thing, that CODIS?
Well, if you think about it, I just peeled off a big Band-Aid off of this family from a conviction they thought was done from 1983. They thought their sister's murderer was in prison. Now I'm coming along going, hey, you know what? The bite mark evidence is junk. The jailhouse informant had a huge incentive to lie, and that wasn't disclosed to the defense like it should have been. So we're going to let the guy go. Well, I did have to say that, but I also got to say, and we know who the guy that really did it is.
Yeah, and that's certainly very helpful, right?
It is. It is very helpful.
What an incredible case. I read the whole case in the National Registry of Exonerations, and I encourage my listeners to go to that website. It's terrific, and any case of wrongful conviction is there, and they take you from the very beginning all the way to the very, very end. So Dubois was the 172nd death row exoneree to be free. And when you think about how awful it would have been that they gave him the death sentence and that he was executed, it's too late after that. So
yes.
How wonderful a thing that you were able to free him. And so when did he actually walk out of prison after 37 years?
We because of COVID, we actually did it in 2 steps. We got him out of prison on August. It was late August. I'm trying to think of
this year.
Yeah, August of this year. It was late August. I don't remember the exact date. We got him out of prison first, and then on September 14th, we vacated his conviction and fully exonerated him.
Oh, that's wonderful. Wonderful. What a beautiful feeling you must have that you were able to bring justice to a case of such horrible injustice. Well, Teresa, we are just about out of time. I'm so grateful you were here today to give us this look at what the Conviction Review Unit does and what they have done in the case of Robert Dubois. So thank you so much for your time and your wonderful expertise. And I hope people really learned something today. Certainly I did. For our next podcast, I just wanted to mention we're going to be dealing with the issue of reentry. And we have 2 guests who have nonprofits to help people coming out of prison. And I'm sure someone like Robert Dubois is going to have a very difficult time in the world that he entered so different from the world he left behind back in 1983. Yes. So I'm sure, I hope he has some support. Well, thank you again, Teresa, for being here with us today. And we hope our listeners will join us next time for Pursuing Justice.
Thank you.